On to Chapter 5, Estimating Project Costs and Times. Here we are. Okay, so we're going to talk what are the important learning objectives I'm looking to discuss here today. Understanding estimating project times and costs is the foundation for project planning because we need to stay on track and know where our baseline is. We're going to describe guidelines for estimating time, cost, and resources. We're going to talk about methods that are used to do these things. We're going to distinguish between different kinds of costs associated with a project, and we're going to suggest a scheme for developing an estimating database for future projects. Okay, so here we go. Project estimating. So estimating is defined as the process for forecasting or approximating the cost and time of completing a project deliverables. It's the trade-off, balancing, and benefits of better accuracy against the cost of secured increased accuracy. So the more time and effort we put into it, the more accuracy we may have, but do we have everything we need to be able to make that happen? And we'll go through the kinds of things that we need to make those things happen. And then there's really two ways that we can estimate. So we can do a top-down approach where we kind of have an idea or somebody experienced who says, okay, this kind of project is going to cost approximately X, Y, or Z, and I'll give you a range of accuracy on that as we move through the slides. And then you can do a bottom-up. So now we've created that WBS, we've created those work packages, and we can kind of put values to them and build up what our cost is. So it's probably going to be more accurate, provided nothing out of the ordinary happens. But it's going to take a lot more effort to go to that micro level of building up all those individual costs. So why estimating in time and cost is important. So estimates are needed to support good decisions. Estimates are needed to schedule work. Estimates are needed to determine how long the project should take and its cost. Estimates are needed to determine whether the project is worth doing. They're needed to develop cash flows, and they're needed to determine how well the project is progressing. So when we talked last week, we talked about kill points. If the project is going way off the rails in terms of cost, maybe it's just not worth it doing it anymore. We need to understand what the project is going to cost us to make decisions on which project to pick. So estimates of both time and cost are really crucial in deciding even if a project is going to be moving forward or not. Factors influencing the quality of estimates, so the planning horizon. You'll notice in a lot of businesses, they'll have a planning horizon that's out, say, 5 years, and these are, the estimates are really high level for those things. And then as we get closer, you get more and more specific estimates of accuracy as we have more information what's going on. Again, because I come from a purchasing background, we would have a lot of planning horizons. We would be planning for things like material costs, which would be indexed. So what it's going to cost to build that building today versus when I do it 3 years from now may be different depending on where the indices we see are going to move. Project complexity can affect the quality of the estimate. So if it's a really complex project, there may be things that we just simply can't estimate for, or things that need to change along the way. People. So how good are the people at estimating that we've asked? How familiar are they? What's their comfort level? Many companies go through a lot of change and turnover, and so it's hard for them to make accurate estimates when they don't have a lot of previous experience or their previous experience is somewhere else. And that's not necessarily how this business runs. And it's understanding too your capital planning versus your operational planning. Project structure and organization. So how are we operating the project? We talked last week about having it projectized and having an external company coming in versus running it internally. Is it a whole bunch of different departments that are making little estimates for you, or are we summarizing it together and someone has a really good idea? Padding estimates, a lot of people will give more time and cost than they actually think it needs because they want to have a contingency there. The problem is you're building up all sorts of extra contingencies. And then usually at the end of the day, a project has a project contingency on top of that. So the relative effectiveness of your estimate can be dependent on how much of that is built into it. And ideally, we want to get to a situation where people trust that there is a project level of padding and aren't padding everything so much that it becomes non-feasible. Organizational culture, how much people are working to their budgets and understand the goals of the company and are willing to support them. And then there could be other factors relating to the individual companies or how the project is going, maybe economic terms. I've said it before, I'll say it again. COVID happened and everybody kind of had to change how they were doing things. So if you had certain kind of projects going on, now maybe you need all new PPE, maybe you had a delay in when people could do things for you, so now your timing is completely off, or how they could do them, or the resources that they needed were on site, so we had to put it on hold, but we were leasing those resources and we still have to pay, so now we have to extend it, and maybe there's penalties for that. So there could be lots of factors that affect how quality of an estimate happens versus the reality. Estimating guidelines for time, cost, and resources. So who's responsible, the use of several people to estimate. So having multiple viewpoints of what's going on, you can kind of have a better blended view. And hopefully if somebody is padding and somebody's being aggressive, we can kind of meet in the middle and get an idea. And when we talk about methods for that, there are methods that use those. We're going to kind of go to a scorecard approach. Are we using normal conditions, timing units, independence? How independent are the guidelines that are being used to estimate the project, and what else is going on? Then we talk contingencies. Are there other things that are going on within the company that need to happen for this project to happen? Or are you waiting for your resources to be freed up, and maybe they won't be freed up on time, or you're hoping, but they've really been overscheduled? Have you assumed they're going to be available to you and they're not? All sorts of things come there. And then a risk assessment added to the estimate to avoid surprises to the stakeholders. So what risks could exist and how are we building them in so that we do have some kind of padding? Top-down versus bottom-up estimating. So top-down estimating, usually it's somebody who has experience, so they take their knowledge and information to determine the project cost and duration, and that's why oftentimes we want to build up these estimating databases about previous experiences, because then you can have somebody who is a project estimator or a cost estimator who, based on previous information, can say, okay, I know what happened on X, Y, and Z projects, so we think that A, B, and C are going to be this time or this cost. Bottom-up estimating can take place after the project has been well defined. So again, this is going to be further down the road, depending on where your time horizon is. It serves as a check on cost elements in the WBS and provides the customer with an opportunity to compare low-cost, efficient method approach with any imposed restrictions. So we can kind of look at these individual items and say, okay, if you adjust this or that or change your requirements, we might be able to reduce the time or cost associated. And we're dealing with the micro there where we can, where when it's on a macro level, we don't really know how we could reduce the time or reduce the cost or what the implications are, because it's really a broader scheme kind of picture. So conditions for preferring top-down versus bottom-up, and I'm going to apologize, when I put this on the blue slides, it doesn't look as pretty as it could, but I feel like it's still legible to read. So for top-down, it's really a strategic decision-making thing. Cost and time are important. We're going to do a bottom-up because now we can individually break out those items. If there's high uncertainty in what's going on, you're probably going to use a top-down approach because you don't have those details yet. An internal small project, so we're just going to, I don't know, upgrade all the carpet in the building or in the office area. We can have an idea of what carpet's worth and just kind of put that through, as opposed to spending the time of what is it going to cost to get down to someone pulling up the carpet and taking out the nails and redoing the subfloor. We can just, it's a small enough project for the company that we just move on. There's probably going to be a factor in most companies of a value that they see fit where bottom up has to happen versus a top down can simply happen, or a timing horizon. Fixed price contract. So when we're going to a fixed price contract with somebody, we're going to bottom up estimate and we want those details. When I worked in both automotive and aerospace, we would ask for specific cost breakdowns. So we would look at every component of something that was involved and what was going into their initial launch for us when they were running something, so that we could see how things were moving. Customer wants detail, then we need to go bottom up. An unstable scope, top down, because we don't know exactly what's going to happen in the project. It's kind of changing as it goes along the way. So the preferred approach in defining the project would be make rough top-down estimates, and then we're going to develop our WBS/OBS, and then we can make those bottom-up estimates now that we have details and kind of see where we're going, and then we can develop our schedule and our budgets because now we have more detail, and then reconcile the difference between the two as we go along to say, okay, yeah, we thought it was going to be 300,000, but actually it's when we looked at the individual costs of having somebody come in to do the computer upgrade training, it's going to be X. Or when we reconcile the difference and we see that all of a sudden we're paying for specific customizable modules, and that wasn't what we were thinking when we got our top down, that's why we're over budget. Or and then we can say, oh, guess what, guys, that just doesn't make sense for us right now, we need to eliminate that. So I think both approaches have value. One can kind of get you started to say, this is where we're going to be at, is this worthwhile? And then the other one kind of helps to validate more. Methods for estimating projects' times and cost. So for top down, you might get a consensus method. You're going to ask a few people and get them to agree on it. A ratio method, which we're going to look at, which is kind of here's what we think it would be at a low, a medium, and a high, and we give an average of those kinds of things. Appropriation method, function point method for software and systems, and then learning curve. So simply, we have a lot of experience. As we get better, we feel like our cost on this kind of thing is going to go down. Or the company that we're using, as they get better, they may not need as many hours to do certain tasks because they've done them repetitively over again and they've learned our systems. So as that learning curve comes, we're going to ask for reduced cost or time on certain activities to keep our costs down. And then the bottom-up approach, so we could have a template and we fill it out based on what's going on. Parametric procedures applied to specific tasks, and then a range estimating. So we don't necessarily always know exactly what something's going to cost, but here's the range of what it could be about. A proportion method, allocating project costs using the WBS. So we're assigning certain proportions to each area. And then within that area, as we get to the sub-deliverables, we're assigning certain proportion to each of those, and that's how we're breaking down our cost. Simple basic function count process. So again, here's the low, here's the average, here's the high, and the complexity weighting of how you think that's going to happen, and it's going to give you a total of what things are going to cost or what you think your estimate's going to be. Function point count method. So here you go. Here's the endpoints, the rated complexity level, and you do the math on it, and here's what we think our cost is going to be. Range estimating. So here's the low number of days, average, high. So here's the range of what it could be and what the risk associated with each is as to whether or not we think we're going to be accurate. You could have a hybrid approach, so you macro estimate, and then as things start to happen in certain areas because of the importance of them, you're going to go ahead and start breaking them down into detailed estimates as the phases go on. So this is those timing horizons. Once we get closer and we know exactly what's going on, we can give a better detailed estimate of where we think we're going to end up. So top-down and bottom-up estimates, intended use, feasible/conceptual phase. So does it make sense to move forward with this? What's the preparation cost? So 1/10 to 1/3% of the total project. So it's a pretty low cost. But the problem can be, it can be accurate -20% plus 60% is the range that can be acceptable. So you could be very, very different from what the cost is you've estimated. And there's those methods we talked about earlier. Bottom up, so budgeting, scheduling, resource requirements, funding, timing, because now we're getting really kind of specific. It's also costing us more, so we're looking at 1/3% to 1% of it. But the better we plan, the better we're going to execute because we're going to know what's going on. And again, now our range of what's acceptable accuracy has gotten much smaller, so hopefully we're closer to our totals. And there's the methods that we talked about earlier, how we can do that. The level of detail in the WBS varies with the complexity of the project, the need for control, so how much are we trying to control how this project is going. When you're in situations where budgets are really tight, you're going to have high control, and we're going to be watching, and the range in which they're going to allow to be acceptable for materiality is going to be lower. Those things are going to be affected by the project size, cost, and duration. Other factors, if there's excessive detail, it may emphasize departmental outcomes rather than deliverable outcomes, creates unproductive paperwork. So the more detail you have, maybe it's just too much and we're just in it for creating work. Inadequate detail, we might fall short of meeting the structure's needs. So really there's this balance. We don't want to have too much detail. We don't want to have everything down to, you know, the very minimal dot, but I've always been given the analogy of there's things that are acceptable in a car and things that are acceptable in an airplane. And so the amount of detail required when I did a statement of work for a car was less than that of what was required for a landing gear for an airplane. So because when we get into structure testing and we're doing drop tests and everything else, it's very, very expensive if something doesn't go right at that point. So we're going to have as much detail as possible in the beginning so that all those things have been accounted for and we get in the right direction when we're ready to hit that rig. Types of costs. So you have your direct costs that are clearly chargeable to what's going on. You have project overhead costs, so they're tied to the deliverables or work packages, examples, salaries of the project manager, temporary rental of space, supplies, specialized machinery, and then you have SG&A. What I used to call SG&A and profit here is just general administration and overhead costs. So not directly linked to a specific project, but it would be your advertising, your sales costs, your accounting, all those functions that need to happen to make things happen. For instance, who's going to assign your cost account? But they don't necessarily directly relate just to that project. As we get through those milestone periods, you're probably going to see charts like this of here's what our actual cost was, here's what we committed to the client, and here's our scheduled budget. So how are we tracking to where we're supposed to be? How does one refine estimates, and what are the reasons for doing that? So we will refine an estimate if the interaction costs are hidden in the estimate. Normal conditions do not apply, so things start to happen out of the normal that we couldn't have expected. We're going to have to refine. Things went wrong on the project and we redesign. The project scope and plans change, so we get partway through. Maybe we see a market that we can exploit, so we're going to expand our scope because we can hit the market fast and go forward with it. Or maybe, you know what, this isn't that great. We can reduce our scope and just do the bare minimum to get by, and that's going to make everybody happy. People are overly optimistic, and we might have to adjust our estimates. I would call this many projects where people, when they're asked how much it's going to cost, say, we're going to do it in a week and it's going to cost $1,000, but they don't think about the details of what goes on and the resources that may be constrained that they're waiting on, and how those things are all going to stack up and add. And people engaged in the strategic misrepresentation. So potentially it could be people just didn't have the good viewpoint of what they should be focused on. All right, so we talked about why it's important for creating that database. That database is going to be something that we can use in the future for new projects. Estimating database is going to have all these different types of information inside of it to help make accurate estimates, knowing what would be required for that kind of project. Mega projects can often be very different because they can end up over cost and over time. They're so big that they're just hard to handle. It's a large team involved in many departments, and the control just maybe isn't there. So here we're talking high-speed rail lines, airports, healthcare reform, the Olympics, developing a new aircraft. I know aircrafts are expensive because I've been there. There are also what's called white elephants, so projects that are over budget and undervalue. The cost of maintaining the project exceeds the benefit, but for whatever reason within the company, we decide that we're going to continue to move forward regardless. Okay, and again, here's your key terms that we've talked about and need to understand for the chapter.